I think,
Hey,
camera's on. Cool.
there we go. Hey, Jared, how you doing tonight?
I am doing well. Doing well.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to
All
hang
right.
out. I just caught the tail end of your policy meeting. Kudos to you for putting those meetings out there on the stream too. That's exactly what I was talking
Yeah.
about. This kind of series and stuff is that there's not enough politicians really just out here one having the conversations, but just really making sure that people are aware of what they're doing. So I was really appreciative that one I was able to catch that, but it gave me a little bit more of an idea of what you're about right now. So
Yeah. So I'll say this because I don't, there's like only a couple people in here, but if you don't know, I'm running for governor in Alabama as a write-in independent with a lower I candidate. I'm not a part of the independent party, but I am an independent, non-affiliated. But independent's plastered everywhere, so I'm not going to try and change that at this point. But yeah, we do all of the campaign meetings are public, and any meeting I have with someone else is public as long as they are willing to. Some people don't want to talk about the healthcare system and their the direct impact it's had on their life. So I understand them not wanting to share that publicly. Fully understand those
right.
people, but a lot of people just want to have a discussion, and my preference is to do it publicly. And it's partly it's intentional because it helps spread awareness. Like I get that, but it's also like no, like let's have these discussions so you know where I am. Because yeah, I'm a dude
Right.
from Daphne, Alabama. Like I get that people are hesitant, and I'm more than willing to admit that I don't know everything. So let's have these conversations, and you can know where I'm at right now. Like let's have the conversation. And okay, no, I don't know. I don't know how to fix that problem. We'll start
Yeah.
looking into it. I hope that it's something the governor can do because in our state, at least, it's a very different situation with the governor than other states that I've encountered. It's a much different situation. So
Right. Yeah. And, I grew up in the South. I was born in Texas, raised in Atlanta, and then went to college in Oklahoma. So I'm familiar with a lot of the problems across the South in particular, but I know Alabama, there's a lot that I'm not familiar with. So I'm excited about this conversation, kind of see what we can learn in
yeah,
general as somebody kind of familiar with the region, but not as familiar with the state or local issues that you might be more focused on. So again, for those that are joining, this whole series is called Candidate Conversations. If you're talking about it or you share the videos, you can use that hashtag, make it easy to find some of the conversations that we have. But the whole point is that I really feel that right now on TikTok, we're seeing that kind of wave of politicians in particular getting onto TikTok. And if you look back at social media and the role it's played in politics the last 15 years, it's been really evolutionary. People talk about how Obama used Facebook in 2008, and then we look 8 years later and how Trump was able to use Twitter. And so as we come up on
right.
2022 and 2024 or 2024, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how TikTok or some of the other platforms really play a role. But I think the biggest goal is to make sure that these conversations are being had and we really elevate the voices of those smaller or passionate candidates that have really good ideas. So in general, if you want, for people who don't know me, again, I'm Mr. Earth Rebirth, aka Andrew. Earth Rebirth is the nonprofit I've run for the last 13 years. We focus on educating and empowering people to take food, energy, and water into their own hands. We started in Oklahoma. We've set up over 150 community gardens across the Midwest, but mostly in Oklahoma. And again, at the end of the day, it comes down to, I was raised by a conservative oil and gas family, and we can all battle about the partisan side of environmentalism and sustainability, but we all need to eat, we all need water, and we all use energy. And so, if we can focus on providing those things more equitable for each other, then we can really create more sustainable communities for all of us. So, in general, I really want to just start and kind of you tell us a little bit again. You give us a little bit about your background, but kind of what made you want to run for governor and jump into politics?
Yeah, because if you haven't gone back through the feed, that may not be clear. And if you didn't join that previous live, I'm not speaking to you directly, but if you didn't join the live from the get go, which I know you didn't catch this, but a quick recap. Um, Alabama in October of 2021 announced that we were allocating 20% of our federal COVID relief through the American Rescue Plan. We allocated 20% of our COVID relief funds, about $400 million, and set it aside to build new prisons. And that alone should be concerning. But to pair
Yeah,
that with the fact that our state had been under investigation and was already being sued by the federal government for the conditions of our prisons, and literally the facilities were not on the list of things to fix. So we literally set aside a a much needed resource during the pandemic, during one of the heights of the pandemic, set that aside to build new facilities under the guise of like, you know, at first it was written out as a or is pretended to be used as a way of helping the system, right? And that still kind of is the point is, we're trying to help alleviate the conditions inside of our prisons. And the part that really caught my eye was when I started looking into it because it just didn't make sense. Like I
Mhm.
from just an average everyday white man from Daphne, it didn't make sense. I was like, this doesn't. I don't understand why we would put COVID money towards building new prisons. So I started diving into it, and the official excuse that our state has given repeatedly, even after being told by the federal government that that shouldn't be a reason to use these funds, is for lost revenue. And like that is the excuse because there's a spot in the COVID release like, hey, you can use this to cover lost revenue, and our state said, okay, cool, we're doing that. So that had me deep dive into what do you mean? What do you mean by lost revenue in our prison system? And that's when I realized it was what much worse than I knew about. Like I was aware of
Right.
people making license plates and things like that, but I wasn't aware how deep that rabbit hole actually goes. And that is what made me realize that there was more happening behind the scenes than I ever realized. And I initially did the logical thing, which was start looking at local politics and what I could do locally, something like school board. So for me, that was a pain point because I saw the pushback from anti-mask individuals in our school system, and actually attended one
Right.
of the school board meetings, and like I was on the other side saying like, hey, I literally don't care what anybody in this room says. Like, I don't care. Like, even the board, I was like, look, I don't care what you think. We need to be listening to the medical professionals, and I mean the
Yeah.
ones across the world, not just CDC, because they don't always do what's in the best interest of the people. We need to listen to all of them and say, cool, like every other country is doing X, Y, and Z. Maybe we should be doing that
Hmm.
too. Like that's passing borders at this point. Like we fought wars over stuff. Like if we're agreeing with people that we fought wars with, maybe we should listen to that. So that was
Yeah.
kind of my point during that. But then I found out when I started looking for things to or positions to run for, the school board elections aren't until 2024 for my school board. So that kind of put it on a back burner for me, and I just said, hey, I'll keep looking, I'll keep doing research, I'll keep getting more informed, and in 2024 we'll think about it. And I ran into somebody here on TikTok, who they convinced me that if I was so frustrated and pissed that they would help me start the campaign. Not a whole lot of financial contributions or anything like that, but they helped me get some ducks in a row, get started, and that's what got me here was that happening in late January. So I started running in
Nice.
late January, early February, and that's kind of how I got here. Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to take over your entire. I know it's a conversation with candidates, so I don't want to take over the entire
Oh
spiel.
no.
So that is
Have you
my
run for any
not
office
short-winded.
before? Have you run for any other office before?
I have not. No. So um, this is the first time running for any kind of public office. Correct.
Yeah. Nice. Well, again, kudos to you for doing it, but also doing it so transparently because, the fear for a lot of people, we all complain about our politicians, but the fear for a lot of people to actually jump into the race is big enough. But to be a first time candidate and to be putting it all out there as you do it is just, it's another respectable thing. So, you mentioned the prison system, and I definitely want to dive a little bit more into that at certain points. It sounds like that's definitely a passion of yours, and I'm
Yeah.
curious kind of what the private prison system looks like in Alabama as a state. I know that's an issue kind of different across each state. And then in particular, what other issues are kind of at your top of the passion list when it comes to what you're trying to fight for?
Yeah, so private prisons, I actually don't think we have any currently in place. One of the aspects of these prisons originally was going to be Core Civic, which is a publicly traded prison company, which people don't
Hmm.
always know exists. So when we say private, it's not just a private business; it's a publicly traded private business.
Right.
Literally, they have shareholders that rely on them making money off of people who are incarcerated. So like if the current public system, if the public prisons are bad, like that's a whole nother level of how can you live with yourself doing that. But we don't currently, of the facilities we have, the state ones, they're not private. I can't
Okay.
speak to the federal prisons offhand, but the actual state run prisons, sorry, the state prisons we house state inmates in are not private that I'm aware of. I haven't found any that have been listed as private.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's a positive.
that well, yeah, that's a positive note, and yet
Yeah,
somehow
a
we're
positive
still
note.
we're yeah, and somehow we're still being sued by the federal government for it. So
Right. So I heard you talking a little bit about that in your policy meeting. You want to go a little bit more into that about what that lawsuit includes and kind of
yeah,
what entails?
yeah. So there there's a little bit of history we need to get into first, and it's something I wasn't aware of until a podcast came out. If you want to hear more about the previous situation we're about to touch on and more of where we're at, there's actually a great podcast episode done by a Birmingham, Alabama radio station. It is called Deliberately Indifferent. Go look that up. It's a 12 issue or 12 episode series. They just covered all of it in earlier this year. But essentially, in the 70s, so coincidentally, right after the civil rights movement, our prison system got as bad, if not worse than it is right now. And we were investigated then by the federal government. Back then, we ignored it and didn't fix it. And then the federal judge who was presiding over it actually had the federal government take over our prisons. So they said, hey, you're not doing it. You're not fixing it. We've told you what to do. Guess what? We were taking over. And that lasted, 15, 20 years, whatever it was. And then the 94 crime bill happened and, it got worse again. Now we are in a spot where, we're understaffed. We're at about a third of the staff we need for the 15 or so facilities that we have. So if we need 3,000 people, we have about 1,000. And that contributes to the mistreatment of those who are currently incarcerated. So physical abuse, rampant drug use, sexual abuse. I gotta be careful. I don't want to get the live attacked, but
Right.
think of anything that you would not want happening to another human being, and it's happening inside of our prisons. And then there's also medical neglect, which you may have caught some of that from the live, but there are people who recently there was somebody whose appendix ruptured, and they were being beaten against a chain link fence after their appendix had ruptured, and they ended up not surviving the situation. And that stuff happens all too often. So
Hmm.
that's a taste of the reasons that we were being investigated, or we were investigated and then are now being sued. And there's an entire report that the Department of Justice has put out. If you can stomach it, go read it, because it's not
Yeah.
good. It's a very big report that shows a lot of the mistreatment and things that are happening inside the facilities. So
Yeah. And as you mentioned, this isn't an isolated incident. It happens all over the country with some of these prisons. Oklahoma City's prison, I believe, is under investigation for similar instances where they've had deaths that are just under suspicious act. So, if you were to be in a position of power, like as governor, what do you see as kind of the first simple steps that you could address something like that? Obviously, you can only do so much as one person, but what would you look at as your first moves?
I wouldn't say it's a simple step, but the only logical solution that I've come up with, and one of my teammates is here, and they they have voiced their concerns with this solution, and I am still wanting to find a better one, but it is the only one I've found that even remotely sounds like it would work, and that is to literally declare a state of emergency and bring in the National Guard to fill in the lack of staffing and provide
Mm.
some type of external oversight. I understand it's a problematic solution. We have the military does not train people to be caring. I'm aware of that, but we also aren't doing that now. So the hope is that we
Right.
will have a a group of individuals who have responsibilities and expectations on them that is not the Alabama Department of Corrections, which does not care to fix the problem. Cluster in the comments saying it's me. I'm the volunteer. Uh, they have experience in the military, and they have valid concerns, and I admit that. The flip side is, like, if we don't do anything, people will just continue to not survive our prisons. So we got to try
Right.
something. So the idea, though, is it's not a permanent solution. It's a temporary, deploy them, get staffing and oversight settled, get things safe for everybody. Because the thing that people aren't talking about a lot is, um, it's not just unsafe for the incarcerated individuals. It's unsafe for the staff. Like, if you're understaffed,
Right.
you can't do what you're asked to do safely. If there's two guards for a dorm of 300 inmates, like,
Yeah.
you can't actually do your job, and then nobody's safe at that point. So,
Right.
not that I don't want to put more emphasis on the safety of the corrections officers, because they have a choice to be there, but they're still humans and still deserve to be safe, trying to make a living, and
Yeah.
pay for survival. So, like,
Right.
I want them to be safe. Also, I also just want the entire system to be different. So,
Yeah. You mentioned the license plates, so while there's no private prisons there in particular profiting in that capacity, I'm assuming there's some sort of partnerships when it comes to production with some sort of corporations. And the license plates is probably just at the state level too. But is there any other sort of
yeah,
big problematic issues with corporate exploitation of those prisons, even if they're not private?
yeah. So it's not just external companies using the labor necessarily. I want to touch on the hidden profit motive that some people don't think about because it's not obvious, and that's
Right.
the internal services and resources that are necessary to have the facilities function. So let's say food, healthcare, and communications, because those are the three that people
Yeah.
usually bring up. All three of those are private industry that are handling those for the state inside of our facilities. And those are for profit companies. So they do everything with the mindset because it's their job. It's their business's purpose is to make money. So what they do is do
Mhm.
things as profitable as possible, which is problematic. You're putting incentive in for profit when it should be, according to Jared at least, the motive should be rehabilitation, getting people back into society,
Yeah.
not a profit motive. I'm aware though that's not actually the purpose, so, like, we can have that discussion at some point if you want. But from the public perception of what prisons are supposed to do, it's supposed to be a correctional facility. You're supposed to correct the
Right.
problem, not add to recidivism. So uh, I want to point those out. So healthcare, the food issue, communications. If you want to if you want to buy your loved one something to send them, like a care package, that's a private industry. If they want to buy anything on the inside, that's a private industry. That's also happens to be the same company you have to buy the care packages from, but that's all
Right.
profit based as well. Down to their shoes. Like, if you want to buy them nicer shoes and not let them have to wear the, I think, essentially Crocs that they get, you have to buy that from a very specific company to send them in. You can't just send them a pair of shoes. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's all, like, the hidden stuff that people just don't think about on an everyday. And if we broaden out to more of what you're hinting at, uh, offhand, I don't know of any that are, like, we don't have, like, chain gang work release programs like used to happen in the Jim Crow era. Like, that doesn't exist.
Right.
Uh, but we still do lease the labor for minimum wage if they're not working for the state. So if they're working for a private company, they get paid minimum wage, and that's 7.25 an hour because our state doesn't have a state minimum wage. We follow the federal guidelines. And
Okay.
the thing that people have to realize is that's what they get paid gross, and then the state takes a chunk, and then they pay their taxes, and they end up getting
Yeah.
$2 or $3 an hour or something along those lines. And to put that in context, if they want to go to the doctor, they pay a $4 copay.
Hmm.
So you got to work 2 to 3 hours at the best possible job to pay for your copay. And if you don't have the money, they still
Right.
let you, in theory, go to the doctor, but then it gets put as a pending, like, IOU essentially. So as soon as your account has money, they'll deduct all those charges. And that's assuming that you're working on the outside, not working for the state itself. And that's where it gets
Right.
even worse. I, it feels like every day I learn something worse. And this isn't new information, but if you're working for the state specifically, we have something called Alabama Correctional Industries, and that is a subset of the Alabama Department of Corrections. So you have ADOC, and then you have inside and under it Alabama Correction Industries, and that is a
Interesting.
um, manufacturing company. So they make furniture, they make chemicals for cleaning supplies. I think they do laundry.
Mm.
Um, but the weird caveat is somewhere on the site. I wish I could find it again. I found it somewhere. It may have been in like their history or whatever it was, but it was founded. And the premise was we're going to create this so that we can offset the cost of the Alabama Department of Corrections, right? So it's, you'll bring in
Right.
revenue, but it'll offset the cost of the prisons. And on paper, I get it. Like I don't agree with the concept, but I understand where they're coming from. It logically, like I understand. I don't agree morally,
Yeah.
but sure, let's go on that premise. But then you find out that they can't sell any of those products to the public. They have to sell them
Mm.
to other state agencies. So you're not
Interesting.
actually saving tax money. You're just pulling it from other places. So like our libraries, the governor's office, like desks and anything that the ACI makes, if you're a state agency, you have to buy it from them first. Like you have to
Right.
check and see if they sell it and get it from them first. And then if they don't sell it, I think you're able to go find it from another vendor. But that's any like libraries, offices,
Yeah.
pick a state agency, and it's I don't even want to say it's what makes it worse because it's bad in the first place, but they're paying 15 to 25 cents an hour to get that stuff made, and then the products aren't even cheaper. Like, not that it would be better, but like they're the
Yeah.
same prices if you just go on like what is it, Wayfair. Like if you were to look for the
Right.
same style end table for the same size, the same laminate walnut covering, like not hardwood. Like we're talking about,
Yeah.
PFD, or what's the particle board covered with a laminate like
Right. Yeah.
walnut finish. It's like $700 for a 42-inch table. And you go on Wayfair,
Yeah.
go on Amazon, and like as long as you're not getting one of the like Wish.com, like you're looking for regular furniture, they're all about the same price. Wayfair,
Yeah.
go on Amazon, and like as long as you're not getting one of the like Wish.com, like you're looking for regular furniture, they're all about the same price, if not
Right.
cheaper than the ones you can get through
Yeah.
ACI. And it's just it's it's exploitation on top of exploitation on top of exploitation, and then you get to the bottom of the highest level of oppression, not the bottom level, but like it's people on the
Yeah.
bottom level is the people that work inside that aren't at ACI, and they do all of the free labor. So it's the people who work in the kitchens, the people who do cleaning, like anything else that's needed to make the facilities run, and they don't get paid for that work. And
Yeah.
that's another level of hidden expense that people don't think about.
Yeah.
We have an exclusion in our state for involuntary servitude still. There's an amendment coming up that's supposed to remove that. I don't know how much good it's going to do, but at least we'll remove it officially. But we still have that as an exclusion on our constitution. So, you know, we use that for slave labor, and no
Yep.
one seems to want to talk about it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Uh,
It's a huge deal. I think, and when it comes back to the conversation about savings, it's so frustrating and constantly, especially when it's on the sustainability side, where you are always trying to argue for policies that have a price tag on them, and the argument against them is always what it costs, and never really what you're going to be able to save on things like food quality, water quality, energy access, any of those things. But on the flip side, part of the distrust of that is because of situations like this when you claim you're going to have savings, and really what they mean is they're just going to create more profit within that system for themselves, and it's not actually saving much when you're not actually cutting the cost of any of those materials. You're just selling it and exploiting it so you can give more profit around the system to people without actually improving the quality of care for those people that need to be rehabilitated. So it's
right.
extremely frustrating. But to steer that kind of back to where I was just going a bit to sustainability, last week, Sean for Governor's hanging out in the comments. So, hey, Sean. But we talked last week about Jackson's water crisis, and it's been a big
Yeah.
viral issue lately, and the failure of the water system. And one of the things we talked about is that's not the only city dealing with it. I know in particular, there's not anything that severe happening right now in Alabama, but there are definitely a handful of cities and quite across the area that have significant issues with their water systems. And in particular, I think it was the Mid Central Water Authority I was looking at that has some pretty big issues. And what was noticeable about it is that while they also have some of the highest pollutants, they're also the only majority black community area, and they have one of the highest poverty rates. So Fulton is 53% black and 47.4% poverty rate. So that is consistent across just about every state. When you see these issues of
Yeah.
water quality, it's the poorest areas, marginalized areas that are dealing with those. How do we address that on such power to these cities to address it individually? But in essence, it does affect other areas if they're not addressed properly, or if certain areas can't afford it because they just don't have the tax revenue. How do you address that as a state or a federal government to make sure this is not an issue for all citizens or those citizens?
Yeah, I can speak broadly to the federal side just because it's of interest because I don't want to run for federal office, but it would be easier to solve some of these problems when you create your own money. It would be much easier
Right.
to fix some of these things where you can just say, yeah, no, we're going to do this. Like, done, fix it. It's fine. It's more
Yeah,
complicated than that, but if you're not familiar, go look up. Like, it's it's made up anyway. We can do a lot more. We just choose not to. So on the state level, though,
100%.
like yeah, we're relying on revenue, and our state has put itself uh, in a pickle intentionally. Um, I'll because it's a part of my key three. I'm gonna pivot slightly just to the education side to prove a point. So
Yeah.
our education system, the funding for our education, where the funding comes from, is written into the Constitution, and a part of that is through property taxes, and that's not uncommon. The interesting thing for our state, at least, I'm not sure, Sean, if you're familiar with Mississippi, I'd love to hear if you guys have done something similar, because our sister states tend to follow suit, going back to the late 1800s, and
Hmm.
we actually we put into law into our constitution that the way you assess properties, specific classes of properties, so agricultural, residential, and I think there's one other one that's, I think, Class C properties is the title for them. They are, for tax purposes, are evaluated at 1/10 their real estimate.
Hmm.
So if you have a plot of land and it's just, let's say it's a forest, it's just a bunch of trees, it is assessed at, like, I think it actually, those plots specifically, if it's meant for timber, I think they're maxed out at like $100. Like,
Right.
it's just like it was written, like you can't go higher without legislative change.
Yeah.
So if an area is rural and there's a lot of farmland, a lot of timberland, and just housing, residential, all of that stuff is assessed at a much lower value, and that's what we pay some of our school systems, or part of what we pay our school systems with. And like
Right.
that type of situation, we've done intentionally, so that any of the rural communities can't get themselves out of poverty. So when we talk about the water
Yep.
system, if we go back to that, somewhere like, oh dang it, what county is it? Oh, I can't remember the county offhand. It's right outside of Montgomery. Nope, not Elmore. It's can't think of it. All right, so it was recently
Anybody in the
visited by
comments
the
help us
federal
out?
EPA. Yeah, if you can think of it,
Yeah.
they were recently visited by the federal EPA for the the overwhelming problem in that county that is tied to poverty, where they can't afford to fix their septic systems, so they end up straight piping their septic into their backyards, and they end up having cesspools
Hmm.
just hanging out in their backyards, and they don't have the money to fix the problem. Like they don't make enough
Right.
as a population to even fix their own tanks. The city can't do it because it's a poor cities. It's a poor community overall, and that has been an intentional, um, by adding everything to our, not everything, but a lot of things to our Constitution, so that it's
Right.
near impossible to fix unless the people in power want to fix it. And Lowndes County, Jess, thank you. Lowndes County.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah.
Comments, thank you. Uh, Elmore is on my mind because that's where the new prisons are being built. It's Elmore County, so
Right.
that's what popped in my head. But Lowndes County, thank you. And the state has intentionally made things really hard for smaller municipalities. Another example would be the minimum wage thing we talked about earlier. The state doesn't have one, and until 2016, a city could have raised their minimum wage. And when Birmingham tried to, the legislature said, "No, we're going to pass a bill, and now you can't raise your own minimum wage. You have to follow the state, which doesn't have a minimum wage. So follow the federal." And it's like
Right.
literally a city now, Birmingham can't, if they want to, can't set their own minimum wage to force that growth as a city. Now it's still up to the businesses at this point because the state's not going to do it. Like they've literally pushed it the other direction. So like there's no reason they would.
Right.
Anyway, so that we intentionally have kind of hamstringed the smaller municipalities to keep them from being able to fix issues like water issues. And I'm not aware of anything as bad as the Jackson situation for overall water quality. There are places that's bad, but it's not to where stuff has shut down at this point.
Right.
That added new thing to my task list of things to look into to figure out if that's a concern we need to be worried about.
Right.
So
And issues like that again, that really is the name of the game with sustainability is we know we're facing a lot of these different issues across the board. And Jackson for decades has known they had that failing water system. And I think Sean had said it even just a handful of years ago, the estimated price tag was a couple hundred million to fix it. And now they're saying it's up to $2 billion to fix that system. And all they have is about 75 million in federal infrastructure funds to even work with. So it's like,
right.
where do you really go when we know we are neglecting those systems? And especially in a state where they have made it intentionally harder to correct that process or to make fundamental changes without getting, constitution past the Constitution. So do you have ideas again, as if you come in as a governor, how do you get past that constitutional overreach to some extent to give freedom back to cities or some of those areas to really make some of those decisions for sustainability?
I don't like my answer, but I haven't found any way. Like
Yeah, I mean,
I haven't found any
it's a
ways to
tough
do it.
one.
Even our Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, Alabama Department of Environmental Management, they, from what I've heard from other environmental agencies, and I haven't spoken to enough. I'm still trying to get meetings from those organizations. The downside is, man, they're typically nonprofits, so they're grinding themselves to the bone already, and to take some
Yeah.
time away to speak to a write-in candidate, like I get it, it's a tough ask, but from them, from what I've heard, is they either have too much red tape for certain things or people in place who just don't care currently. Depends on the issue. Most of the time, it sounds like it's actually just people who are in charge who don't want to address the issue. So I'm hoping we can fix that by hiring people at the higher levels to push that from the top. But I don't know what red tape we're going to run into yet.
Yeah.
You know, we you there's an example I give for the environment side that usually catches people's attention, and it's our state has been on the receiving end of at least twice literal train loads of human feces from New York and New Jersey. They have shipped in train loads to put them in dumps, just not even in treatment places, just in a waste fill or a landfill.
Wow.
Like, and twice. The first time was in 2018, an election year, interestingly enough. Happened in 2018, and then again in this year in February. And in 2018, they're like, "Hey, you got to stop doing this. Like, you can't do this." And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, got it. We'll stop. We'll stop." Here we go. 4 years later, they do it again, and it's like if we had the ability and the care, we could have stopped this 4 years ago. And
Right.
I haven't found an answer on which one is the bigger problem, whether it's not being able to not being able to fix it or not willing to. I'm not sure which one is the bigger problem. But I've started looking into something called triple bottom line accounting. It was introduced to me
Mm,
by the person who got me involved in running for office in the first place, and they're trying to
nice.
implement something similar on a federal level. But the idea for anybody who's not familiar is businesses right now they primarily focus on the bottom line, and that's profit, and the other two would be the human cost and the environmental cost of doing business. So in this case, oh, you're a landfill in the middle of nowhere in Alabama, right next to my campaign manager's house, because she already called it out in the comments. You you are accepting literal waste that you're not supposed to at $1 per ton or whatever it is. Like it's some stupidly low number, and okay, cool. You want to do that. Like we can't necessarily stop the business coming in because whatever. Because I don't think we can, but we can at least penalize or tax because it's not the right solution, but it's the solution for the system we're in. Tax the business who's accepting that responsibility. Essentially, it's like okay, you're going to take it. That means you're accepting the responsibility of that. So what environmental impact is this going to have? Okay, cool. Well, we are going to
Right.
go ahead and just we're going to start taxing you for it, and we'll start putting that towards protections, and that's the best thing I've come up with so far with the current
Yeah.
power structure we have. Jess,
Yeah.
my question is, how does that
It's a
affect
huge
groundwater and
asset.
such? It's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah, no kidding. And that's why, on an industrial level, agriculture is always against it. Water, energy companies, they're always against it. But triple bottom line is it's a huge push in sustainability circles, and it's a great opportunity to really hold them more accountable, not just on the profit, because everybody talks about
Yeah,
profit as if it's what drives economies, and it's not at all. The sustainability drives economies, the ability to keep it going and make sure we don't degrade the entirety of those resources in that system. And again, that's what's so hard about I think a lot of these conversations is because this isn't just a few years of a problem of it getting worse. We're decades in the making of these problems getting worse. So coming up with a simple one answer solution is almost impossible most of the time. But that brings us to another point: healthcare. And
yeah,
when it comes to just across the South in general, we know healthcare is very sporadic and inconsistent on what kind of access you have. But in particular, after the passing of reversing Roe v. Wade, I know so many conservative states immediately just went into trigger laws. I believe Alabama was one of them. Pretty
yeah.
severe
We passed
when it came
ours
to their
in
laws.
we passed ours in 2019, so we were prepped and ready to go. It
Yeah,
wasn't something we could actually use because of Roe v. Wade. So there was an injunction, I
right.
think is the right term for it, but literally within days, they undid the
Yeah,
injunction and it was in effect. Yeah,
yeah,
and again, that's a legislative question. Unless we somehow get really creative with the powers of governor, like, and that's not a good solution.
right,
That would be a temporary get attention solution, and I don't think it's the right path. Only because the legislature has way more control than they should, so they could quickly fix that if they wanted to.
yeah,
If they didn't like the way I did things, they could quickly just they could rectify that in a couple ways. So I don't want to do that
right.
for clout or for attention or a temporary relief. I mean, it's tough because I know that that's also saying I don't want to help people immediately, and like the concern is the long term damage. And like I'm not saying that
Right.
where we're at isn't a problem, and I know that I am in saying that I won't do something that might potentially help people. That sounds like I don't care to some people, but it also is saying I know where we're at, and what I don't want people to do is blame the the handcuffs that are on me and
Right.
my choice to try and do the long term better thing, because the doing something in the short term isn't always the better solution. And that might be my privilege speaking, and I'm willing to be told I'm wrong, but I haven't had anybody push back on it yet. So willing to listen if you
Yeah.
have a different opinion there, because I've
No,
from
I
the get
think
go
it's
said
fair.
I'm a
Yeah.
white guy.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it's important because again, if we're talking about just if you were hypothetically governor right now, and you did have some sort of wave of the wand move you could make, it's also a matter of precedent and what that sets up for later on and it being used in
Right.
even more dangerous ways. And we've already, the irony of that, without making this too partisan about Democrats or Republicans, is Republicans constantly push that they're the ones for small government. And here they are constantly pushing government overreach in these capacities. And we're trying to find a way to be sensitive without trying to overreach back to give those rights back, but also find a way to use the system to, protect itself. So it's a frustrating
Yeah,
conversation for sure.
I'll say this because I'm running as an independent, a non-affiliated candidate. I both of the parties have their problems, and I actually don't have a problem with I don't have a problem with overreach necessarily. Like I have no problem with saying like, hey, you've taken too much. We need to take some
Right.
back. My concern is it's like me trying to grab uh, fresh water out of a stream with just my hand and like
Yeah.
trying to give water to 300 people. It's like that. Like, can I get somebody some water? Yes, but I haven't washed my hands, so like, what did we just do to the water source? Like, who knows what we just did? Who knows what damage it's gonna have to that person? Plus, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, that's a really bad analogy. It was whatever. I kind of got the point across, but like, I'm more worried about what the response will be versus me taking the power back and helping the people. Because like I'm like
Right.
if I knew there weren't going to be any long term ramifications, for instance, like they could just impeach me. Like they could say, "Hey,
Right.
you're not following the Constitution. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution. You are now directly opposing that. You're now getting out of office." Or they could just pass bills when legislation's in session. They could just pass something and change things and make it worse.
Right.
Like they could get rid of the very few exceptions that we have for abortion right now. Like we have a couple,
Yeah.
but we our attorney general. I don't know if you saw this video or not, but our attorney general has said that he's willing to use our conspiracy laws to go after organizations helping people get healthcare out of state. So it's people is not they haven't said they're going to go after people. They haven't said it out loud. So
Right.
if we're going to take them at their word, if you're individually doing it, they're not supposed to be going after you. They're not going to go after the people getting the healthcare. They're going after the doctors providing in our state, and then other organizations that use their funding to help orchestrate that illegal activity, essentially. And
Right.
like if they're already willing to do stuff like that, like I can't help but assume they're going to do other things if I overreach in a temporary way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That actually makes me think of another topic when it comes to immigration in particular. Because if I remember right, I think I had it here somewhere. HB 56 was an anti-immigration law you guys passed years ago. It was very similar to Arizona's law when it came to stopping and being able to check people if their immigration status, but it went a lot further originally, and what it had that it was requiring school employees to report students who were not documented. It had prohibited giving rides to undocumented immigrants. I think some of those have been like alleviated when it comes to certain pressures, but in particular, I know that from a lot of the problem with those laws is that the employers of illegal immigrants are never held accountable, and it becomes a big issue that they're going after these actual small people and either criminalizing them entirely or deporting them without ever holding the people accountable who are exploiting them as a part of the system. Are you familiar at all in recent years how big of an issue this might be in Alabama right now, or if this is getting worse, getting better based on any improvements on those laws or anything of that such?
I actually am not terribly familiar with how problematic it is.
Okay.
I I will make one small correction and just say that I don't like when they're referred to as illegal immigrants. Most people prefer undocumented because
Yes.
once you start using the phrase illegal, it makes it easier for people's brains to allow bad things to happen to them. So I would prefer to use that language. So I will. Any undocumented immigrants. The interesting part from what I was looking at is there is there's a potential that I can help as governor in some cases where, so that's the interesting part, is the governor's there to make sure laws are executed effectively rather. And
Right.
that means I have some control of how those laws are, how they are instituted or how they are handled. So there's a potential. I need to figure out how if it'll work in our state, but in a couple other states, governors have actually signed executive orders to say, "Hey, not at a state facility. Like if ICE comes in, you can't do that at a state facility. So if it is a state
Right.
hospital, if it's a county jail, if it is a state prison, like if it's a school, pick any facility that is run by the state, and it is essentially a safe haven or a sanctuary facility from those federal agents. You know, I can't stop local police that I'm aware of.
Right.
I haven't figured out that. I don't think that's doable. We had an entire meeting about trying to reduce harm from local police, and there's doesn't seem like there's a whole lot I can do from the governor's position. But at least from a federal, state troopers, people like that, we could institute, as long as we haven't prohibited it, we should be able to
Yeah.
institute some way of keeping ICE from doing that on state property, and
Yeah.
that'd be something I would love to just implement and just like, hey, yes, like let's you're not doing that
Right.
here. Like if you want to go hunt them down somewhere else, like you're not getting our help, right? Like
Yeah.
you do you, federal government, but we're not helping you there. And I
Right.
want to go back slightly because you talked about how typically the conservative side of the political spectrum likes to have smaller government, and for a conservative leaning state, at least from a government standpoint, we have the longest constitution in the world, the longest active constitution. Like
Wow.
pick a country, and ours is longer. Like India, ours is longer. It's 900. Sorry, it's over 400,000 words with
Wow.
978 amendments. And a good
Wow.
chunk of those, like 70-ish%, I'm going off memory at this point, but about 70% are local amendments. So they are Baldwin County, collects this tax for this purpose, and that's now in our Constitution. The statewide
Yeah.
like basis of law is now handling a city's taxes, and
Wow.
it's so bad because I mean it's 978 amendments. It's so bad that we're actually an amendment that's on the ballot this November, November 8th, is actually a recompiling of our state constitution so that it can be more comprehensible. So they're going
Yeah.
to try and organize all of those county and city amendments into chunks and say, all right, Baldwin County's amendments are here,
Yeah.
Tuscaloosa here, and they're trying to make it a little bit more legible. Um, but I wanted to bring that up where we are supposedly a conservative state, and that group typically wants smaller government, but we are literally set up to have the largest constitution ever, and it just people
Right.
don't. There's some cognitive dissonance there when you bring that up to people. They're like, yeah, but like we're trying to make sure that the smaller governments aren't like the cities aren't overreaching. And it's like, yeah, but we literally just made the state in control of everything. Like
Yeah.
you just gave 160 some odd people control of everything in the state. Like
Yeah.
you do
Right.
realize this, right? Like
Very ironic.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, before I forget, one, I do appreciate that correction because you're totally right. The subjectivity and interpretation of that terminology is extremely important when you're referring to a group of people. And it's very easy when you're referring to them as illegal to take an entirely negative connotation and demonize them with that. So I really do appreciate
yeah,
that correction. I want to get
yeah,
back to one about you running as an independent, because when we talk about also whether any of these amendments just make your job as an independent that much harder, how difficult it is constitutionally to win as an independent in Alabama. But this also comes down to the question of just generally when it comes to third party candidates, the age old question of are they hurting or helping when it comes to running?
yeah,
And it's extraordinarily difficult, obviously, just from a mathematical standpoint, for an independent to win on a national level, but state to state, it varies. I think we had somebody ask early on, or at the end of your policy meeting, somebody had asked, "What do you think your chances of winning are?" And that's a
Yeah,
pretty good question. Obviously, a bit hard
yeah,
to answer from a statistical standpoint, but how hard
yeah.
do you think they have made that process for you as an independent to win?
I mean, they've made it pretty hard. So I'll start with when I first decided to run, I was trying to get my name on the ballot as an independent. This state still confuses me. Their application says ballot access, independent candidate ballot access petition. So I was like, all right,
Hmm.
cool. I'm running as an independent. Sounds great. So like that's why it's plastered everywhere as independent. And that petition, the stipulations in law are a percentage of the electorate from the last election have to sign the petition. So it's like
Hmm.
I think it's 3% of the last group of people who participated. You have to get a 3% of those people.
Right.
This year it turned into 52,000 signatures, and that's a tough ask. What makes it worse is everything they tell you. They want it done as a paper signature. They want wet signatures. So they want you to get
Hmm.
52,000 people to sign in person a petition sheet. And when we talk about how difficult, 52,000 isn't actually that large of a number when you consider there's 30 or 3 was it 3.7 million registered voters. So it's not a huge percent. It's
Right.
doable. The problem is money. Like the only way to effectively do that, especially starting in January of the election year, would be to have enough money to travel the state and pay other people to travel the state and get those at third party or third hand, uh, both actually. So there's a Libertarian Party that got their name on the ballot this year in Alabama. So we actually have three printed names on the ballot for most positions, and
Hmm.
they spent about, from what I've heard, about $200,000 on canvassing to get those petition signatures made. And
Yeah.
to put that in context, myself and the Democratic governor candidate have raised less than $10,000 in cash donations.
Wow. Yeah.
Like the Democratic candidate has raised less
Yeah.
than 10,000 in cash donations, not in kind, because
Right.
that bumps it up a couple of 10, was it maybe another 30 or $40,000 in kind donations for
Right.
event spaces and things, but cash donations like $20,000 like that, that's a party thing, and that's kind of the point. Is like a party got their name on the ballot, but it's the same number of petitions whether you're getting a party on the ballot or just an individual. They don't care. It's the same number.
Wow.
You're getting your
Yeah.
name on the ballot, so they want a large chunk of the state to get those signatures,
Yeah.
and it was uh it was a tough run. So they make it difficult. They want paper, so that was that. The one thing they did actually give, or they've actually made it a little easier for a write-in candidate. Our state does straight party ballots, which not every state
Right.
does. You can vote just I want Republican, just hit a box or a circle, and you don't have to do any thinking. You can just say give me my party. Some states don't do that. We
Yeah.
do. The nice part is you can actually still do write-ins, and they are a line item override. So you can say I want Republicans, except forget the incumbent. I want Jared, and you can just put my name on the governor spot, and everybody else still, it falls down the line, but it overrides
Right.
that one line. So I have that going for me.
Yeah.
More to your original point about like likelihood. I can't give, like you mentioned, I can't give stats. Like I don't have the money to pay for polls to get that,
Yeah.
that information out there. I will say this, and it's a number I keep throwing out to people because it's what keeps, outside of the personal conversation I have with people, this is what keeps me running. In 2020, one of the most contentious elections that I'm aware of in recent history, the one that if you were going to get out and vote, you were going to get out and vote. Our state, out of 3.7 ish million registered voters, 950 did the straight party Republican ballot. 590 ish thousand did the straight party Democratic ballot, and 1.4 million didn't vote.
Hmm.
They just didn't vote. And then the
Yep.
difference is the mixed ballot where they actually tried to do their research and vote for the ones that made sense, and they didn't just hit give me Republican.
Right.
They may still have all voted Republican or voted Democrat, but they didn't hit the straight party box. And that's what I keep telling people is we're literally just told that it's a red state, so don't bother.
Yeah.
But we don't actually know that. And I'm not saying all that 1.4 would vote for me, but it gives me hope because they have other options and they're not voting for them.
Yeah.
Why? Well, the ones that I've talked to are all like, well, they don't effing care about me. Why would I? Why would I care? Why would I vote for them? And it's like, all right,
Yeah.
cool. Like, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican, and not just accidentally. A, I didn't have the filing fee, but B, I wouldn't run under the either party anyway. Like,
Right.
I don't see those parties. And I always have to make this distinction because I'm connected to several people who are running on the Democratic side. People running are trying to do good, and we align very much so on a lot of our beliefs.
Yeah.
I just don't think the party cares. As an
Yep.
organization, it's not structured to care about people. And
Agreed.
the thing that I've pointed out to people, even in the Democratic Party, because people have reached out. I won't name names, because I don't remember their name. But after the primaries, when our Democratic governor candidate came out as pro-life and talked about chopping off the genitals of sex offenders, and talked about people who don't believe in separation of church and state, and called them aliens, like wild things. I got a lot of attention from people in the Democratic Party who were like, "So what's your name now? What's going on?" And it's like,
Yeah.
but their question was usually, "Why didn't you run as a Democrat?" And I'm like, "You let anybody run." Like, why would I? Like, that's why people aren't voting for you. Why do you think you have like almost half the votes as the Republican Party has? You don't show that you actually care about people. And then, like, the filing fee is that, and signing a piece of paper saying that you're going to run as a Democrat and you agree with their bylaws. Like, that's what they care about before the
Yep.
primaries. They're like, hey, give us your 3% fee. I got it right this time, Taylor. I tend to say third. You have to pay a 3% of the salary of the position you're running for. So governor's position makes 126,000 ish a year. I'm going off ballpark off memory. You have to pay 3% of that as your filing fee. So
Mm.
$2,500 to just put your name in the bucket of available Democratic candidates.
Yeah.
And I get what they're doing. They want to show that you can raise funds and be a candidate. And it's like I get the premise. That's fine. Um, but there's no real like vetting process beforehand, and they're proving my own point for me when they're like,
Yeah.
hey, why didn't you run? It's like, I mean, you don't even like your own candidate. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't know what to tell you. Like that should boggle your mind. Like you should really be confused as to
Yeah.
why you're still in this group. But
Well, and the party's
yeah,
extremely frustrating right now. They say one thing, and then when we have really progressive candidates in primaries, they try hard to not make them the candidate pretty consistently, depending on the state, all across the country. And it's a huge issue where it seems like the average person you talk to is far more progressive than the Democratic Party wants you to believe. This idea that, oh, universal health care is great, but we don't want to scare people. It's like, who are you scaring other
right.
than your donors? The people want it. Public education,
Oh,
four-year
you hit
college,
on
all
it.
these things. So it's just, I again, kudos to you for just when the party's ready to step up and support progressive candidates, then they're here, they're ready. We see them all over the place, but until then, you
it
gotta have to step up and run as your own.
they're going to have to do more than just want to support candidates like to get elected. They're going to have to their initiatives, like their bylaws, are going to have to change. So for me, I can speak to the Alabama Democratic Party slightly because I was as
Yep.
confused as everybody else when she came out as pro life. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to search the bylaws because like this doesn't make sense. Like she had to sign a piece of paper. How are you going to let this person run as pro life when they're in the Democratic Party? I was like, I don't even recognize myself as a Democrat, but that's doesn't make sense. So I did a control F. So like I did a find inside the document and I looked for any medical related term. I was like, I was abortion, uterus, woman, healthcare, pick some term that's tangentially related to it, and couldn't find anything in the entire 40-page bylaws related to that specific piece. And I stuck that in the back of my head for a conversation for conversations with Democrats moving forward because it's like, hey, guess what? Like your party doesn't care. It's not even in their bylaws. So why don't you stop
Yeah.
talking now? But the other part that caught my attention was the part that did make it into their bylaws is being um, uh, pro law and order. And I was like,
Hmm.
okay, so we don't care about people's health care, but we are for the police. Okay. You're
Yeah.
going to have to change some ways that your party is organized and structured and the things that people have to agree to run as a Democrat before I would even remotely consider it anymore. Like, I didn't want to in the first place, but I'm like way opposite end. Like have, has this party not been paying attention? Like,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
decades?
Catch up.
Like,
Catch up. Yeah,
yeah. Like,
for
even
sure.
if we just count the last 2 or 3 years, like, that should have been adjusted, but it should have been there in the first place. But it
Yeah.
needed to be adjusted after the last couple of years when when the rest, not enough people have actually paid attention. But um,
Yeah, and again, that's kind of the
I'll
maddening
spare.
part is like a lot of people are looking at the Democratic Party as like they're just being gaslit, and a lot of Republicans, everyone that I talk to at least that still identifies Republican, their favorite thing to do is just be like, well, the Democrats say this and always don't do it, and it's like, well, the one thing we can say is like if you were paying attention, the Republicans have been saying since day one they were going to try and take away Roe v. Wade. They've been saying they were going to do
Right.
these things and I think a lot of people at a certain point, when they're so overwhelmed and don't know how to actually digest which candidates are good or bad, it just becomes, well, there's the bully, and then there's this person putting their arm around me and then tripping me at the same time. And it's maddening for them to want to try and support that person. They rather just back away from both. And so,
Right.
again, as you said, they have a lot of progress to make if they really want to start listening to their voters because it's pretty clear what people want and what they need. But it's not as profitable for both parties when they go that route. So there's a lot of reform that has to happen. We're getting
What's that
around that
about
hour
profit
point.
motive? We keep coming to that profit motive.
I know, right? It's amazing. It's that one bottom line always seems to drive everything. We don't
Yeah.
go to the other two. But this has been
Yeah.
a great conversation. I'd love to do this again at any point you want to. And I think as we have more
Sure.
of these, it'd be good to get a handful of candidates, maybe do kind of a round table and you bounce ideas off each other. Whether there's candidates in your state, if you have other candidates that might want to do this with me, especially those smaller candidates that need
Yeah.
to get their TikTok presence up, whoever we can do to really help get their voice out there. But is there anything that we didn't touch on you want to touch on real quick or tell us where people can support you to kind of wrap it up?
I mean, I think we touched on education, but the focus for me, if there's anybody who sees this now, or I think you record and post them to YouTube or something later, right? So
Yeah.
if somebody seeing this, and I didn't talk about it earlier because I've now been streaming for 2 hours, so I want to make sure I cover it. I The education system in our state, I know we can't fix everything, and that's something I'm repeatedly saying to people who ask me to fix everything, and it's like, I can't fix everything, even if it was in my powers. B, that stuff's not. So like there are things that aren't, and for the education system, we're focused on the funding distribution side. The income we're actually getting the funding from is a legislative problem. It's actually partially in the Constitution as a part of the issue, so we can't just fix it. We actually have to wait for the legislature to try to fix it, and
Right.
then put it up for a vote for the public. But the funding side, I want to make that more equitable, so we're not having a huge disparity between our lowest spending on a middle school is something like $5,000 or $6,000 per student per year, and the highest is something like $10,000 or $12,000 per year in a middle
Wow.
school, and it's like shouldn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that I'm not opposed to other schools maybe having extra if somehow that happens. Like if there's some local revenue and they want to bring in some extra revenue and they want to pay for it for some extra stuff, that's fine. My problem is this bottom line is below the need for a good
Right.
education. And the burden
Yeah.
is then put on that community, and it ties back to what we talked about earlier. Like we've put the burden on the communities that we've historically uh, marginalized and put them in a place where they can't do the things that we're telling them they're responsible for. And
Yeah.
to that end, I will end this with something that if I don't say at every meeting, I I don't like it if I forget to say it. So, Alabama's Constitution, the longest one in the world, currently and active, written in 1901. We, they were so proud of what they were doing that they made a concerted effort to take detailed day by day minutes of their meetings, near verbatim, if not exactly. They left out a couple pieces where they're like, we had a discussion and here's what we came to, but generally, verbatim, word by word, 52 days of conversation. Day two, they set the path for why they're here, the purpose. And literally, it was to install white supremacy into law so that it would propagate the entire state and become normal through society. Mm-hmm. And that is the reason why our Constitution is so long and continues to restrict power at the lower level so that those at the higher power maintain that power. And they're continually making it harder to undo that. And that's the problem I have with the recompiling that we just did, or we're have on the ballot. We're recompiling. I don't disagree with that, but we're also trying to remove racist language. And for me, the thing I want people to think about, if you're seeing this and you're from Alabama and that's on the ballot in November, realize that the same people who refused to rewrite the Constitution were it was a bipartisan okay to get rid of the language, but there's a very big portion of that group who doesn't want to rewrite the Constitution in the first place, knowing that it's there to install white supremacy. That should cause it. That's a huge red flag for me, and I have a hard time. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time overlooking the excuses that will come out once we've removed the racist language, and how much harder it will be to then actually get rid of white supremacy. So, and I'm going to stop saying those words because we're right at the near end of an alive, and I don't want TikTok to start sending the wrong people. So, but you're right. You can actually go read it. I'll say so. But I will say this: Wikipedia, Alabama Constitution of 1901, footnote number 9. If you want to start reading.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look into that. I appreciate you taking the time, and again, this is an awesome conversation. One I want to have again if you ever have the time. I agree with Eamon. Alabama definitely needs you, and my mantra, a phrase I've used for years with Earth Rebirth, is dream big, act bigger. A lot of people have really awesome dreams on how we can make this world better. My favorite thing in the world to do is talk to people about those ideas and passions, and I can definitely tell you're passionate about what you talk about. So, again, glad to meet you for the first time. Definitely think we can do this again. If you know any other candidates in Alabama, send them our way so we can help get their voices out there. And I won't take up too much more of your night, but have a good rest of the evening.
Yeah. Appreciate it. If anybody's in Alabama, look up Richard Brackner. He's in my area, but he's running for a local, hold on. I can't remember if it's Senate or House of the state, but he's running for a local office in my area, and go give his account some love so he can go live. He doesn't have it yet.
Awesome. Yeah.
So we need to get him that access.
As we mentioned, this will be up on YouTube under Mr. Earth Rebirth. We'll share clips from it. Feel free to download it, use it as you want. And anybody else who shares the lives or the videos, just make sure you use that hashtag, use Jared's hashtag and all the other ones, just so we can really grow this community of progressive candidates.
Yep. Back the beard. That's the one that we're using everywhere. So
back the beard. I love it. It's an awesome beard, by the way. Kudos to it. I'm jealous.
I appreciate it.
I can't go that long.
I've been growing it out since the campaign started. I've had a beard, but I've been constantly letting it get longer until my wife cuts it off in the middle of the night one day.
Yeah. Hashtag back the beard. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon, but have a good rest of the night.
Awesome. Thanks. You too.